That's it. There we go. We're all on there. Hi, Gab. Okay, here we go. Okay. Everybody just look straight. Can everybody? Okay, let's do this. Here we go. There. Now it's starting. The 2 minutes is starting. They look great. Guys, this side, please. We got that, right? Yeah, please. And guys, right next to George right here, please. Nice smile, guys. Everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Can I get a single? Quickly, is that okay, Sarah? What's the two Sarahs as well?
See the skull necklace in full.
Thank you very much. Welcome to tonight's screening.
God, I want to see more movies like this, movies that are just creative for the sake of being creative and free.
We sold out the Elgin Theater!
My people! Toronto Film Festival!
Great films, they leave me feeling a little more alive and connected, and they remind me to laugh and hope and hurt and feel.
I just want to tell great stories, and I want to tell different stories. We don't only have to tell one type of story.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the TIFF press conference for Alias Grace. We have a very chatty panel that we're happy to share with you today, and we're so glad that they could all be here. So I am going to introduce them one by one. Of course, the novelist Margaret Atwood. Director Mary Harron. In the center in the back, producer Noreen Halpern. Their illustrious cast, Care Logan, Edward Holcroft, Sarah Gadden, and the screenwriter, Sarah Polley. Welcome, everybody. So the usual drill, I'll toss everybody the first question, and then I'll open it up to you guys. And when you raise your hand, they'll bring you a mic. So first question obviously should go to you, Margaret. What do you think in Grace's story echoes through the years? Why was it as relevant when you wrote the book and as it is now and as it ever will be?
It's one of those stories involving a crime, a male perpetrator, and a woman who was also involved and may or may not have done the bad thing. We never knew. And what was interesting to me was, number one, we never knew, but also the way everyone projected onto her their ideas, which were very, very diverse, depending on where in the political spectrum those ideas were coming from. So the reformers all thought that she was an innocent young girl, badly treated and threatened with death and dragged in against her will. The conservatives thought that she was an evil, scheming temptress who had put the male guy, put the man up to it and sort of basically seduced him, offered him sexual favors because she was jealous of the woman in the household. And both of those stories were running at the same time. So we have seen over the years crime cases treated like that. Really quite a few of them, with different stories being put out by different sections of society. And it carried on in Grace's case with reporting that was so different that people couldn't even decide whether she was tall or short or what color her hair was. You know, we had different reports of that, of people who were there at the time. So she was a real blank screen onto which people projected.
Sarah, you first got, Sarah Polly, sorry, I'll distinguish between the Sarahs. You first got gripped by this when you were a teenager, and it held on to you for a very long time. What about it captured you so much, do you think?
I think there were a number of things that captured me about it. I loved how I could never get to the bottom of it. I read the novel over and over, and I still felt there were things that I couldn't pin down. And it captured a part of my psyche that I think I was unfamiliar with. I think it captured something about the duality that I think a lot of women develop as a sort of coping mechanism of who it's all right to be and who you are. I was fascinated by what happens to that kind of anger and hurt when someone has been harassed on every side for most of their life, the way Grace was. I was really fascinated by how viscerally it paints the story of immigration and of Grace's immigration to Canada. And it was all in the aftermath of the 1837 rebellion, which is probably my favorite part of Canadian history. And I thought it was so interesting the way it wove in the echo and aftermath of that rebellion. But really, it was something in my subconscious that grabbed that I just couldn't get a handle on, and I kept coming back to it over and over and over again.
And it's kind of true that it influenced your film Stories We Tell, right? The idea of more than one truth.
Yeah, and never being able to get to the bottom of what really happened in the past, that's ephemeral. And certainly in the case of Grace Marks, it's absolutely ephemeral. We cannot know who she really was. There were so many versions of her. So I think the way the book deals with memory, versions of things that happened in the past, and holds on to that ambiguity, while landing for moments on things, that really captured me, and it stayed something that I think stayed in, for me, the architecture of all the films that I made. All the films. I made so many films. I made a couple films, actually, that it really influenced, so.
Noreen, you get handed this amazing gift of 6 finished hours of television. It's a big project. Can you talk about some of the problems that you're really happy that you were able to solve as a producer, some of the places you were able to find and things that you were able to do?
The truth is, I feel like I had the easiest job of anyone sitting up here because there were 6 extraordinary scripts based on this amazing novel, this true story, an amazing director. So it was about, how do you find the money? How do you find the financing? And then how do you create a space where everyone can just do really good work and keep everyone away from the artists who were creating the work? So, I mean, yes, it was amazing to have a partnership with Netflix and CBC where we had the money to make this. And the key, I will say, is Sarah Polly said to me from the very beginning, if we don't raise the right budget, we're not making it. And I think that's a really important thing in television making and filmmaking. You make the script, you make the project, you don't just make the financing. And we were really, really lucky to get that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, sure. So Mary, what is it that you were hoping to convey about young women like Grace and Grace's story? What were you eager to sink your teeth into as a director? What grabbed you about it?
Well, I loved how complicated Margaret's portrait of young women. It's never her portrait. They're never simplistic. They're never just women good, women innocent, women suffering. I think one of the things is that suffering can. May or may not turn you into something monstrous, and that's the question hanging over the whole story, the mystery running through it. Did Grace's sufferings, ennoble her, and is she a kind of saintly victim, or was she someone who was turned into something monstrous? If people suffer, they will react. Sometimes they will react in violent ways. That's the question. And so I wanted, it's about young women. It's also about women in a class system. It's about women who are an underclass. So you have, Grace and her wonderful friendship with Mary, and then you have Grace in the later episodes in her disastrous rivalry with Nancy, another oppressed young woman. So I think I really wanted to explore all that. It was so just incredibly fascinating to me.
Edward, you've been in some pretty sparkling limited series, Wolf Hall and London Spy. What made you say yes to this one?
I think, like all the ones I've done before, it was Sarah's writing. It was the relationships, the relationship between Grace and Simon was a very real one. The world that Sarah had created was a very real world on the page. It's something that actors, you kind of look for when you read scripts. You have that draw into it. And by the time you finished it, you are already invested, and you haven't even got the role yet, but you already have that draw, and it's something you can't really put your finger on. But it was the relationships. It was the relationships between the people. I think they were very real, and I saw the relationship between Simon and Grace it was a romance. It was a love story to me, amongst all the sort of terrible events that happen around it. There was at the base of it a love story, which I thought was moving. Yeah.
Did you have to work out what Edward thinks, whether he thought she was guilty or innocent? Did that matter to you when you were making it?
No. I have my own ideas, but we didn't. I didn't share them with anyone, and I don't think I will.
Care, how would you describe what your character wants, and what was interesting to you about that?
I think that whenever I first read the character, when I read the books, it was very easy to sort of see him as just a bad man, and you could just sort of play him very thuggish, and he's just on the surface just a not very nice person. But I think I was very drawn to the fact that I sort of saw just a very scared young man who sort of made all the wrong choices because he was absolutely terrified. And it was a lot of fun playing with did Grace did it or did James do it? I know what I thought when I played it, and I remember I was sat there for lunch with Sarah one day, and I said, so, I mean, they were both equally as guilty as each other, and she went, oh my, and I was like, no. I was like, that's fine, I can't hear anymore. And it was just really interesting to know that we were both had completely different ideas on what we actually thought, who was actually the guilty party. But I thought it was really interesting then playing with all the different scenes, with different people driving the action forwards with very different ideas on who the perpetrator actually was.
But you took your character's side.
Yes,
there was
exactly.
A side. Interesting. Sarah Gadden, you had, any one of the Graces would have been a very big role, considering that you were milking cows and hauling water and things like that. And then on top of that, you were playing sort of 3 different Graces, right? Or more, multiple Graces, any infinite number of Graces, whether she was shades of guilt, shades of innocence. Talk a little bit about delineating that.
Sure. I think, when you read the novel, you get so seduced by the story. And I spent so much time reading the book and then rereading the book and then rereading the book and then rereading the script. And you become so entangled in who she could be and who she is. And it was really, Mary who kind of proposed this idea of not really playing into one idea of her for the entire show, which was a really kind of brilliant tool for us to work with, because as an actor, you can't really just constantly be hanging in a state of ambiguity. It's not really, it's not possible. And you need to play actions and play feelings and play motivations. And so to kind of have that difference between each version of the story, because there are, after all, many versions of the story in the show and in the novel. So for me, it was really just working with Mary, and we spent so much time together in my garden in prep, and we spent time prepping before prep, really, which was really important because it's such an epic piece and such a dense character. And so often you don't have that luxury of preparing, and there was really no other way to do it than to prepare.
And you actually sat in the garden and read the script aloud, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kara, I hear
I
you.
sometimes just call Mary at night now and read to her, just to, put her to bed, because she misses me.
And Kara, I hear you were an unofficial accent consultant. Is that true? Because you have the Belfast accent.
I was actually, I don't like giving her a compliment, but Sarah would actually, she was doing like 16-hour days, like in every single scene. And then between, while I was waiting to go on, I knew I had a scene with Sarah sort of in 2 hours' time, and then every 40 minutes I'd get a knock on my trailer. And then she'd go, right, how does this sound? And I'd go, no, you need to speak more like this. And I'd, just help her with every other line. But she was...
I went through my phone recently, and on all my voice memos, I have all these voice memos of you, like casual chat or like recording them, like just so weird. And I feel so emotionally attached to them. I don't want to delete them.
You have to make a DVD or a CD, whatever that would be. Yeah. So I'm going to open it up to questions out here. Does anybody, if you raise your hand, we'll get you a mic. Anybody at the moment? Yes, in the front row.
Yeah, it's Hayden Waters from CBC. This question is for Margaret. Margaret, how do you suggest people watch this or like digest this? Do you suggest they read the book and then go through and binge watch the series, or watch it one by one as it's released each week?
I would never. Is this on? Yes. I would never ever be prescriptive about that. I think everyone has their own way. And people who have already read the book, of course, are going to approach it in a different way. People who have read it recently, some people are going back and rereading it. Other people are reading it for the first time, and other people are going to go straight to the series. So there will be all kinds of different ways, as there always are. I got a great compliment for you, by the way, from Northern Ireland.
Oh, wow.
On Twitter, they said they'd watched the trailer, and they said, "Is this about Northern Ireland? That's what I'm hearing."
Oh, great! Did you hear that? Did you? I want to make sure you heard that.
She's lying. She's lying.
Any question?
I would just add one thing. I think anyone who goes and who watches these 6 hours is immediately going to go, and if they haven't read Alias Grace, the novel, go and buy the novel.
Does it feel like a strange time for you, Margaret, to have your books back on the, these stories feeling newly relevant?
You mean because I'm so old?
No, but it's not very often that one's books come back around in one's lifetime.
In one's lifetime, yeah, I think that's key. I think that there's a thing that happens, and let me see if I'm on base here, that a book comes out and somebody such as a Sarah Polley may read it when she's, for instance, 17 and really be struck by it. And that person doesn't have the power at that time to actually do what she wants. And then time passes and that person acquires those powers and those skills, but because of that impression that has been made upon them, at that age, which is a very impressionable age, they come back to it and then they make it. So I think that's the cycle things go through, and I've had it happen with other things of mine as well. So it's the age that the person was when they read it, and then the age they are when they can actually do it.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, Sarah, that you were able to stick with it for as long as you did. Did you at one point think that you would direct it and then come to a different decision somewhere along the way?
I mean, there was a time where, another company had the rights to this, and I was actually hired by them to write and direct it. I always knew I wanted to adapt it. I think what happened was halfway through actually adapting it, when I finally did get the rights, after those had elapsed for the other company, halfway through writing it, I realized I wasn't seeing images the way I do when I write, and I realized it was the kind of thing I could make after I've made 7 or 8 more films, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I felt experienced enough to make now. I felt like because I loved the novel so deeply and I was so invested in what the adaptation would be, I wanted it to be the perfect director for it, as opposed to for me and what I wanted to direct. And for me, what I wanted to see was this directed by Mary Harron. That's what I wanted to see. So I think halfway through the process, I realized my dream wasn't to do it, it was to see it at its best. And I knew who that person was who could make that. What was really a privilege was getting to see, my favorite novel, get to see the dailies every day coming in from set and the way Mary saw it and the way she had framed it. And that was thrilling in a way that worrying about screwing it up myself would not have been.
And Margaret, you said it gave you nightmares, right? In a way that even researching and writing the book did not.
It's very, very powerful in its filmed form. So yes, it did give me actual, I don't mean, that's not a metaphor. I got real nightmares.
Questions out there? Anybody want to throw on? I will keep going then. You actually got a cameo in this, Margaret, and you got to see the props and the costumes and everything come alive. What was that like for you?
Yes, those were 2 separate occasions. Yeah. So yes, I did have a wonderful tour of the props, costumes, and wallpaper, and design team, and hat maker, and everything that they had going on there. Because remember, they had to design for 3 separate decades of the Victorian era, each one looking quite different. So there were a lot of clothes in that clothing room. There were a lot.
And then I hear you gave yourself a line.
Well, sort of, yeah. I was supposed to be disapproving, and you're never just disapproving in silence, it seems to me. But it was the full kit, so it was 90 degrees, it was August. I did have a trailer with my character name on it, which was Disapproving Woman. So I had a trailer that says Disapproving Woman.
Which you have to go in the door of every day.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I had 2 dressers to rope me into all the Victoriana, of which there was a lot. So there was the drawers, the petticoat, the overskirt, the camisole, the corset, the jacket, the capelet, and the shawl, and the bonnet, and the stockings and the boots, and the little knitted net gloves, and the little purse. So I said, they're only going to be seeing my head. Why do I have to put all of this on? They said, we want you to feel authentic. So I felt very authentic. I felt very disapproving because I was so hot. And then we went into the Black Creek Pioneer Village Church, and we were supposed to be shooting that in the morning, but in fact it was, by the time we got around to it, it was 10 o'clock at night, so they beamed this huge hot searchlight through the window. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yeah,
I remember you also like the craft services, right?
Yes. We had lunch with a lot of people looking like a Charles Dickens set. So it was indeed a lot of fun, but it was also very hot. So that's what we did, and that's why I look so extremely disapproving.
It was a painful experience for me because I had this fantasy that she would be parachuted in 2 hours, we'd have her in and out, and it was going to be a military operation, and then that day just got completely out of control. And everyone would also promise me they were all going to be, checking on Margaret, making sure she had what she needed, and nobody would go near the trailer. Everyone was so nervous. So I remember after you'd waited for about 12 hours in your costume in the sweltering heat, me going in and going, can I get you some cheese and crackers or something? And you were like, sure. And then I go to the craft service truck and I checked my Twitter, and she has tweeted out, just got offered the proverbial cheese tray. And she's been tweeting all day about how long she's been waiting. It was just so painful.
Countdown to being on the set. So much of this of the 6 hours depends on a conversation that Grace has with Edward in a study, and she tells him her story, and it forms the spine of the thing, and many different iterations come off of that conversation. But the filming of that conversation must have been so intimate for the 2 of you. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like for the 2 of you.
It was like an intimate marathon because we shot it in 6 days at the end of the shoot. And I think we went through, how many pages? 60 pages of dialogue in 6 days, which is a lot.
Unheard of.
Yeah, and it was a real kind of as much as it was like a mental task, it was also physical for us and for our crew because we were sitting still all day long for hours and hours and hours, and we were also shooting down by the lakeshore. And so on top of, all of this very kind of subtle psychological work happening between Edward and I, there would also be a plane that would fly over every 10 to 15 minutes, depending on rush hour, every 5 minutes. And so we would pause for the planes because we had to keep rolling, we had to get through it. So we would get to these very dramatic points, and then you just hear, Mary would be somewhere in the background being like, plane, trying to hold it together, and then, okay, we're good, and then you finish the scene. So it was really intense.
It was amazing how they were able to hold the performance and pick it back up, because it was driving us all, when it wasn't a plane, it was a motorbike, or something. What we called the sound stage, the sound stage because it's really noisy. But it was incredible actorly discipline, I thought, from both of you.
Yeah. I mean, massive credit to Sarah because, to be fair, Sarah had many more lines than I had, and I was actually pretty amazed. I never said it because, again, we don't like to compliment her. But it was amazing. I mean, she had these huge monologues, and that's seriously hard work for anyone. But it was amazing.
We know every detail of each other's face really well.
That's beautiful, actually. Is there a question?
That was shot in every scene. I would do one take where it was an extreme close-up, so that you really did read what and matching that, because so you'd saw very subtle variations, which incredibly subtle variations of emotion, and they would have to pick that back up and match what they just done. Oh, and then in the most emotional and sort of poignant scene, we had about 10 minutes footage where there was a camera malfunction, and at the end of the day, like finishing at like 3 a.m. or something. Someone came to me and said, we lost. I realized that we just lost the crucial close-ups of the most crucial scenes. And we had to restage them. And I thought, how am I going to tell Sarah that she has to go back to that place? Because it was very, right?
Yes, yeah.
Very much, very do it. But it was amazing. And actually, we what can you do? You have no choice. You find time another day, and you have to go back into that place and recreate it. But you did do it. You did it.
Yeah, I do remember that, you telling me that. It was also kind of one of those moments in your life where you just kind of are sitting there and you were like, there's no Santa Claus, and your dog died. It was so brutal.
The tear quivering on your eyelid was real at that moment. Totally. Does anybody want to throw out anything right now? How did you have faith, Mary, that those still scenes would work? How did you know that it was going to be kinetic the way it turned out to be?
I always thought they would work. It's funny because I think everyone was really worried about them, and I know the crew were like, oh my God, 60 pages of dialogue with just 2 people sitting there. But my feeling is if you have great actors and great dialogue, you're fine. So I just moved forward really feeling that there was so much going on in those scenes, and I found them so fascinating just to read. If you have great actors who can really do it, and I'm going to give Edward a compliment. He's a great listening actor,
They searched, long and hard for Dr. Simon Jordan, and I remember when your tape came in, how excited everyone was because of how great you acted and listened.
It's not easy, listening's an art. So. I just felt like if you have the right people, and I didn't want to shoot them in a fancy way. I didn't want to try and, I'm going to shoot it, keep the camera circling around them. They were shot very classically. The only thing I wanted was to have enough different sizes and to have these at some point, especially for the moments when we come in and out of flashback, to be really tight on the faces. And the other thing was, I also knew it would work because it's not, all these scenes are of very still conversation are leading into very dramatic scenes, action scenes. So they're broken up. And I guess, and the one other thing I would say about it that I did know that I was going to need was to get these very, very tight macro shots of Sarah sewing. Because I knew that we would be cutting a lot and we'd be going from different takes, but I also wanted, actually my husband my husband who was a director, to shoot the second unit of those beautiful shots of the sewing. Because I knew also that you wanted to keep the whole story of the sewing and the quilt making as a little thread running through it. And it was something that would form, like in music, would be a little theme. And that it would be something that would be very, in practical terms, very valuable to have something tight shot to cut to.
But also, going back to the scenes being still and whether they would work, it's again a testament to Sarah's writing and obviously stemming from Margaret's book, but there's so much going on underneath those scenes that it's a gift for any actor when you get to have dialogue where everything is under the surface. You're playing so much under the surface, it's not obvious. And when you have scenes like that, you don't have to do much because you're just thinking the things you need to think, and you let the camera just. And when I read Sarah's scripts, that was the first thing that you read these scenes, and I was like, oh, there's so much going on underneath. And and it's a dream for actors because unfortunately, a lot of stuff now is just on the page. What you see is what you get. There's not a lot of subtext, But Sarah's was thick with it, so it's great.
And that's actually why you also wanted to shoot it simply, because you really wanted to just focus on the faces and on the undercurrents.
On the thinking, yes.
Yeah, he's trying to find out, and she has to calculate how much she's going to say, because obviously she wants to keep him there. But on the other hand,
so there's a Scheherazade-like element.
It's like it is like a tennis match.
Sarah, now that it's done, and you've lived with it for so long, what are you glad that you were able to sort of put out in the world with it? What are you glad to see realized? What are you glad that it's going to make people talk about and think about?
I mean, I think this is an interesting moment for women, and I think it's really excellent that in the same year, Handmaid's Tale and Alias Grace are both, being rediscovered and coming out in another form and being talked about, because I think with Alias Grace we can look back to where we've come from as women, and Handmaid's Tale is this cautionary tale of where we could be going, and we're in this space in between. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, not just out loud and with each other and articulately, but lingering in the background of our mind, and hopefully reached more deeply the way narrative art can reach you. These are pressing questions, and I'm really glad that these things of Margaret's are out into the world in this way. I also think it's looking at immigration at a time where I think we really need to be examining our attitudes in terms of immigration and how we greet immigrants all over the world and from all over the world. Looking back at how every group, when they have come to Canada, has faced discrimination and have come in really, really arduous conditions. So I think that in terms of women, in terms of immigration, I think this is a really important thing to be seeing and talking about right now. And I also think, to have a performance like Sarah's, Grace is the most interesting female character I'd ever read when I read this book. And to see an actor take this on in this way and play every level of her with this much sort of deep intelligence and power, I think is a reminder of what people should be writing for women and the kinds of female roles that should be out there. And I think that Sarah really owns that and promotes that kind of character in a way that I think I'm really proud that that's out there in the world.
Anybody else want to jump in there? Yes, in the front. I don't see why not.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Aideen O'Brien, and I'm a big fan of many of you up on the stage. So my non-press question is, woman producer, director, author, screenplay writer. For those of you who've worked in many other productions that aren't as female heavy, was there a difference in how you like jived with each other, or the energy on business as well as the front end? Like, because I'm sure you've worked in many where it's not as female heavy with the entire crew. I think it's wonderful, so I'm just curious. Thanks.
I think it was. I sort of hate to say that. I've worked with obviously fantastic male producers and directors as well. I think they're one of the more obvious differences, maybe one of the more superficial differences, but one of the differences that meant a lot to me was there wasn't the same segregation of work and family life as I've experienced on sets with men. So, and that's not necessarily because men wouldn't want to do that. I think there's actually maybe less license for men to do that, but we talked a lot about family and kids and work, and it was all kind of wrapped into one conversation. It wasn't like we needed to compartmentalize or hide our life from each other. So I loved sort of ping-ponging between conversations about grace and production design and kids and schools and nap schedules and back to where, I mean, I just found that actually a really holistic process that really actually served the work and served all of us on a level that I think was really important. So that's one difference I can think of. I think there's also, and again, I've worked with collaborative men. We don't hate men or anything. Not that we hate men, but just I do think that there is a spirit of collaboration that came very, very easily. And that was lovely.
We do have a male producer who unfortunately is just out of the country, so he couldn't be here. But I think
would let him into the country.
He's in the cellar.
He has a very feminine side to him, though. But I think it is really true. I think gross generalization, but women are good multitaskers. Men tend to be more centered and focused in one specific way. He's telling me I've got to watch what I say. But the truth is, I just will echo what Sarah has said. And it's really, we talked about this a lot. It's very important to establish this on sets, right? We all work, but we all are human beings and we all have families. And it's really important when you're making art to remember that you're also people and that you have families who help make you better people and more interesting artists. And I think it's a very important message that we felt strongly about making sure was very clear on our set, and that I think we're all gonna take forward with us into the next job that we do.
Did you want to jump in on the what you're happy to be putting out in the world thing? I think it might be interesting for you as an actress. What you're seeing, what you're reading, like what you're glad to be.
Sure, and I think in kind of connection with the previous question also, it was really wonderful to work with Sarah and Mary, and obviously Margaret as well, and Noreen, but also because they're very, very intelligent, extremely creative, very, very talented people. And, you know, Mary was the perfect person to direct this because she could deal with the psychological and violent element of this material. And I think that, you know, playing such a complicated character was a huge gift from Sarah and Margaret. But also in all the versions of her and all of the ideas of Grace, we weren't playing into any kind of cinematic trope of what a woman should be, of what a woman is. And I've been kind of fielding this question a lot about working with, you know, such a powerful group of women. And I really think that the reason why Grace is so complicated and so fascinating and touches so many people in a very deep way is because we were all able to create her in a very kind of honest and organic fashion. And I'm really proud of that, and I'm really proud to be putting that out into the world.
Yeah, and I have to say that it was fantastic to, because I knew Sarah was a great actress, and I felt like she had never had a role that allowed her to do everything, to really show everything she can do, you know, that had, you know, it's very easy for someone like Sarah to be the beautiful girl or the icon or an object of fantasy or of, and to have her be this working class girl who was, see her in working and see her suffering and then see her as bad Grace in her vengeful mode. I particularly loved Sarah's bad Grace. I particularly enjoyed those scenes.
How happy she is.
I know. It was so fun because there was so much suffering, then suddenly you get to let rip. And I have to say, when you had to go for it, like there's some terrible scenes in the asylum, you would just, like this, go for it. And it's like all this exploration of not just one woman's life, but it was almost like several women's lives in one. I mean, I think in doing this one role, Sarah really had to do a multiplicity of roles, which was, for a director, just a wonderful experience to have someone who was not only capable of doing it, but she didn't have to sort of go to her trailer for an hour and find it. And you
can do that? That's an option.
Yeah, I didn't tell you. Because, on that schedule, 11 days, there's no time. So she not only had to be all those people, she had to be them instantly.
Now I'm so bored. I just walk around.
One person.
Just do one person. How did you stand it? Is there anything that you would do to take care of yourself? Did your head just explode and you had to do something to...
I think, truthfully, I was probably in a really unhealthy place when we were making this because I was so physically and mentally exhausted and completely obsessed with my work. So I was not in a healthy place, but I definitely think that Edward and Kara really helped me blow off a lot of steam on the weekend, which was a good thing.
Genuinely, though, I've never, ever seen a schedule like this woman had to work. She was like 14, 16-hour days every single day in every single scene. So she deserves all the credit she gets.
Well, from this magnificent obsession, I think you all made something very, very beautiful. So thank you very much for coming and sharing it with me, all of us, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Johanna.